My sister and I were both 16 and 13 respectively. We were home alone while my parents were out of state for a couple of days to attend the funeral of a longtime family friend. Our grandfather lived only a couple miles away and was originally supposed to babysit us, but he trusted that my sister and I would be fine on our own. Instead, he would be on call if anything were to go awry. Well, of course, something did. Just our luck, I guess. It was around 10 p.m. or somewhere close to that on the second night of being alone. I was upstairs in bed, trying to sleep after a long day of biking around with a couple of friends. Suddenly, my sister came sprinting up the stairs, which she almost never did unless she was in a hurry for whatever reason. She came into my room and was frantically speaking to someone on the phone. I laid there in confusion while she talked. I don't remember exactly what was said, but once she hung up, she hugged me tight and told me that everything was all right and Grandpa was on his way. It turned out what happened was that my sister had been sitting outside on our stoop talking to a friend of hers on the phone when this random pickup truck came slowly rolling onto our driveway. Well, my parents don't own a pickup, so immediately it threw up a red flag. Once it stopped, she saw a man get out carrying a duffel bag, and that's when she came running inside and called our grandfather. My grandfather may have been 60 at the time, but he was no pushover, being 6'4" and having the strength of Godzilla with a demeanor to match when it came to protecting his loved ones. He also owned plenty of firearms, which I didn't doubt for a second he would bring along in case shit really hit the fan. We lived in an area where the police would take quite a long time to reach us, so that was another reason why my sister called him immediately and not the authorities, just in case anyone was wondering why call him and not the police. Suddenly, we hear what sounds like a door being kicked open downstairs. Almost immediately afterwards, we began to barricade my bedroom door. None of the bedroom doors in the house had locks on them at that time. Once we were done, she looked out the window while I sat there, covering myself with a blanket. All the while, we could hear footsteps downstairs, walking about on our hardwood kitchen floor. My sister urgently looked around my room and asked if I had a bat or anything we could use to defend ourselves. I did, stored in my closet. My Louisville Slugger that I used when my parents had made me play baseball when I was in elementary school. I also had a hockey stick in there, but who would use that as a weapon unless in a very circumstantial situation? She rummaged through my closet and grabbed my bat, then stood next to the door while I ducked down behind her. I thought maybe I should grab that hockey stick, but it was very unwieldy for me. Unless the burglar had some sort of PTSD associated with hockey, this was not going to be a very effective weapon for me. We then heard the sound of a gunshot, followed by a man screaming out in pain. The sound of both I can still hear even to this day when I just think about it hard enough. My sister and I were standing by the door almost in tears, when about a minute later we hear our grandfather yell out our names, asking if we were all right. We both yelled out simultaneously that we were. My sister and I pulled the dresser and various other objects out of the way of my door, and we both went out into the hallway. We could hear my grandfather on the phone with 911 as we stood at the top of the stairs. When the police and the ambulance arrived, the man who had broken in was taken out on a stretcher, which I later learned was for a shot to the abdomen. My grandfather had come in through the same back door and found the man in our kitchen searching through drawers. He then came at my grandfather with one of our kitchen knives, and that's when he was shot. The man almost died from blood loss in the end, but he ended up surviving. I really hope he learned his lesson, both through being incarcerated and by being shot in the abdomen and almost losing his life. But of course, you never know with certain people, especially the nefarious ones. When I was 7 or 8, my family went to the beach and rented out a room. We had the kind of rooms where you rent out both and they connect through a door in the center. You know, there's like the doors to leave the room and then the doors to the other one. In the room connected to ours, there was this military family staying there. A typical military dad, some kids, and his wife as well. My older sister was supposed to be watching me that night, as we were down at the jacuzzi during the evening. As we were playing, hanging out, and having a generally good time, I didn't get out much, was naive, and all around a little kid. We were both white-skinned, blue eyes, and blonde hair, by the way. This mom just sits down in the jacuzzi with us. She started talking to us and was making herself very comfortable. I was an extremely naive kid, you see. Eventually, we started talking about books together. She started talking to us about her kids as well, who we had never seen around. We were actually having a pretty engaging conversation. Really in-depth it felt like, at least for a small child. My sister decided she wanted to go back to the room, but I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay and talk with this interesting mom. Well, my sister went back to the room on her own. Now it was just 7-year-old me and some 40-something-year-old woman. This should have set off some creepy alarms, but it didn't for me. She starts talking about going and taking a walk on the beach. It was about 10 p.m. She wanted to go and walk along and collect some seashells. Well, wouldn't you know, I thought that was a real great idea. I'd get to walk on the beach at night and feel free like a big kid. I didn't need my sister or anyone watching over me. I run back to my room to tell my grandparents I'm going to take a walk on the beach with Sue, or whatever she said her name was. I remember my grandmother reading her book and barely even listening to what I said. She just shrugged me off. It's important to know I didn't live with my parents at the time. I start walking down the creepy motel corridor. As I'm going through the stairwell, it's like something straight out of a horror. Too bad I had never seen those kinds of movies at this age. I'm walking through this dark, dimly lit stairwell. The mom's way at the bottom, telling me to hurry up into the darkness. All this and that. While walking down the stairs, that army dad comes out of nowhere, running and hauling ass to where I was at. "Hey kid, your mom's calling you. It's really important. We gotta go right now." He basically grabbed me by the waist and lifted me up, softly, not aggressively or anything. He led me back to our room. He knocked on the door and explained what had happened. I thought that was the end of it. I didn't really think too much out of everything until about a year ago, when this all suddenly came back to me. This woman was leading me away to the beach alone at night, so the army guy got a terrible feeling in his gut at that moment. He decided to intervene on the stairwell. When he told me my mom was out looking for me, since I didn't live with my mom, it set off some alarms inside my head. That's when I realized something was up. I didn't resist going back to my family. Even as a fairly naive kid, I knew since this man was saying my mom wanted me, it had to be something important. I'm 20 years old now, and I truly believed that mom was going to lure me away to do God knows what. The army dude thankfully intervened and probably saved my life. Thinking back, I get such a bad feeling all throughout my body. I now suspect I would never have made it back from that beach trip if I'd made it all the way down those stairs. This happened while I was in college 5 years ago. I was a transfer student and was 21 years old at the time. I was set up to be living in a building that was for students 21 or older and moved in a week and a half before classes began. This school was in northern Michigan, so when I first arrived, the campus was basically dead. I mostly kept to myself, but I was friendly with a few people in my building, namely one guy named Khalil, an exchange student from Lebanon. He seemed nice enough, though there was a distinct language barrier. Things could be fairly easily lost in translation. Our RD and RA, resident director and resident assistant, made everyone who had moved in have a meeting to go over the basic rules and whatnot. At the end of this meeting, as I was leaving the rec room, Khalil suddenly put his arm up on the wall in front of me, almost clotheslining me. It caught me off guard. I was a bit peeved and creeped out at this aggressive move. He began explaining to me that he would like to be my friend and would like to go out for dinner to get to know me. The way he worded it was quite odd. I wasn't exactly sure if this was a date proposal or just a friendly invitation. I just attributed it to his bad English. Like an imbecile, I felt cornered physically and socially. I'm quite awful with confrontation and can often be too nice, so I agreed to go. I soon found out that he meant right then and there, however, when he said, "I'll get us a taxi and we can go now." My introverted side was upset that my night of drinking and unpacking in solitude was being disrupted. I was not very excited, needless to say. If only I knew listening to that inner introvert might have saved me from a very unsettling experience. 10 minutes later, we're hopping into this taxi. As I'm entering, I just feel this sudden sense of dread. I think to myself, I barely know this guy, and the restaurant is miles away. I'll be stranded out there with this stranger if things get weird. As we drive onward, my guard only raises higher and higher. He wants to know everything about me, throwing out questions rapid fire, not just the normal getting to know you questions. My age, dating history, physical preferences, religion, everything. I was thinking, fuck, this is going to be so awkward. I wanted the night to be over before we even got there. At the restaurant, we both looked at the menu for a bit. The waiter came and took my order. Then he asked what Khalil wanted. "Oh no, I'm not hungry." "Watch her eat." "Fuck? Why would you ask me for dinner if you weren't hungry? Why the hell did you just want to sit there watching me eat?" I was horrified. All of my family was in the lower peninsula of Michigan, 8 hours away. I had no friends up here. The only I had were my RA and RD. I speed eat my salad as Khalil watches me, now talking about himself. He told me how he had severe anger problems and was looking for a woman to help calm him, but still be a submissive traditional wife. I was trying to hide my growing horror and uneasiness as I just nodded along. He continued, explaining how he was infamous for his temper back home. His brothers often had to stop him from doing horrible things. At this point, red flags were basically blinding my vision. It was time to end this. I finished my food and told him to get a taxi back to campus. I intentionally sat in the front. I wasn't going to allow the possibility of any physical contact. When we got back, we get in the building. I say a quick thank you and immediately hauled ass back to my room. Door locked, I get into my sweats and chalked it up to just a weird experience. I vowed to avoid Khalil from then on. Around 12:30 a.m. though, I hear a knock at my door. I was watching Netflix, minding my own business, when I took out my earbuds to make sure I was hearing right. The knocking continued. Not a courteous knocking, but a closed fist furious pounding. I was petrified, making as little noise as possible. I went to the door and looked out the peephole. I see Khalil standing there. My room was at the very end of a long hallway. All rooms around me were empty at this point. Knowing how isolated I was, I slunk away from the door, making zero noise and waiting for the knocking to stop. About a minute later, it did, and he growled through the door. "I know you're in there. I'll just wait if you won't open." My eyes widened in horror. I felt a mixture of rage and panic, but decided that confronting him then would not be smart. I quietly waited there staring at the door until I fell asleep. I have no idea how long he actually waited. The next morning, when I finally emerged from my room, I found a couple of pages taped to my door. Oh God, 3 handwritten pages from Khalil, explaining his feelings for me and his intentions of making me his wife. I went straight to my RA and explained everything that happened. She agreed to meet with Khalil herself to explain to him how inappropriate he was being and tell him to leave me alone. Needless to say, he did not. Notes kept coming, and he showed up at my door dozens of times a day. I basically became trapped in my own room, having to hide away from this psycho. It lasted for 8 days altogether, but immediately when classes began, Khalil disappeared. I was told he had dropped out and moved back to Lebanon. I found it eerie how once actual school began, he just kind of vanished. Had he come here only to find a wife to take back with him? I guess I'll never know. So a bit of background info. I currently live with my parents. The house is 2 stories. There's an in-law apartment on the first floor, along with some other things as well. A garage bay, furnace room, laundry room, stuff like that. I live in the in-law apartment. My dad has been working with a contractor and some of his employees to replace the wall-mounted air conditioners. That means there's been a lot of people in and out of the house. The day this particular incident happened, my mom and I went out to do some grocery shopping, and my dad stayed home to direct the contractors. We got back and discovered that they were all gone. My dad had just gone to bed, so my mom and I made some dinner and hung out downstairs for a while. I remembered that I offhandedly mentioned to my mom that our cars were still outside. I talked about a woman whose car and house had been broken into just down the road. This creeped her out quite a bit, and she sent me downstairs to check to make sure the front door was locked. In fact, it was not. It was actually a little bit ajar. I closed it and locked the deadbolt, and then went back upstairs. We stayed upstairs together and watched TV for a few more minutes, until I suddenly heard a loud thump downstairs in the in-law apartment. I assumed this was my cat at first, getting antsy because I wasn't feeding her. I told my mom I was going to go downstairs to do so, and then come back up to finish the episode. As I walked down the stairs, I heard another louder thump. I thought this must be my cat getting excited it was finally food time. Well, when I opened the door, she was nowhere to be found. Really unusual for her, so I was confused. I walked into the kitchen to look for her when I noticed something that made my heart immediately sink. The furnace door was closed. I never close that furnace door, and neither do my parents either. We want the cat to be able to get inside and catch all the mice that live there. I recognized then that the thunk I'd heard must have been the heavy furnace door opening and closing. I was completely frozen. I was convinced there must be someone right behind that door hiding from me. Now, I'd seen a lot of scary movies lately. It could have been paranoia, I guess, but this felt awful, and I knew something was not right. I knew I didn't want to give this potential person any reason to open this door. I put on my very best acting skills and pretended I'd not noticed anything amiss. I did some baby talk to my cat, who still had not materialized, and scooped out some food for her. I felt super weirded out when I had to let the door out of my sight. I was basically keeping it in my vision at all times to see any movement. After feeding my cat, I went back upstairs. I grabbed my mom immediately and explained what had just happened. She was skeptical, of course, again, scary movies and me already being paranoid. She tried to brush it off as maybe one of the contractors just having closed the door, but seeing how off-put I was, she went to go wake up my dad. My dad grabbed his gun and went downstairs. He screamed up at us suddenly to call the cops and get somewhere safe. We hid in the bedroom and called the cops, who showed up and searched the entire house, not finding anyone. My dad explained to the cops. He saw the furnace room door and the back door to the outside were both wide open. I22 and Female worked at a mall when I was a young adult. Oftentimes, it would be dark by the time I got to the bus stop. There were lots of druggies and creeps around as well. They did bother me some, but they mostly stayed away for the most part. One night, I was walking extra late because of never leaving customers behind. I saw a truck nearby. It was talking to a girl I assumed was in her teens, as she looked to be quite young. At first, I didn't think too much of it. A lot of teens had to be picked up from the mall, as they worked in the food court and sometimes on weekends got late night shifts. I honestly thought it must be her dad picking her up. I really did. As I got closer though, I could see she was very upset. Maybe they had a fight or something. The guy looked up a little angrily at me as I sat down. I could hear him saying something to the girl. "Come on, honey, come with me now. Your mom is worried." The girl backed up slowly at this. That's when I fully looked up. I could see she was looking at me with this terrified face. This man was clearly drinking heavily as he smelled of liquor, but not stumbling around. My stomach sank. The bus wasn't going to be there for half an hour. I was a small 5-foot woman myself. Immediately, I started to have a suspicion that this guy was not her father.
"Come on, honey, get in the truck. Get in the truck. It's too late for you to be out."
I didn't know whether this man was her father or not, but I decided it was better to err on the safe side just in case. I walked over to the girl and called out to her. "Hey, wow, I haven't seen you around here in a long time." I started chatting with her, and she sat down next to me, ignoring the man. He was visibly angry at this point and went to the truck. I thought this would be to leave. The girl sat down next to me and explained that man was not her father. She had no idea who he was. He had just randomly pulled up alongside her and was now trying to get her to go with him. I told her to just act natural and keep refusing. I had her back. The guy came back to us with his phone up to his ear and a pipe from his trunk as well.
"Okay, bitch, get in the truck already. Your mom's pissed off. Lady, you need to mind your own business. We're a parent and child."
I told him he clearly was not her father. He had to leave before security cameras captured him doing something illegal. I could just see a look pass over his face, as if he'd just realized those cameras existed, but decided he'd already gone too far. He started to walk towards us. He viciously grabbed the girl by her arm and started to drag her away as she struggled. I tried to push him off of her, but he told me not to get between a father and daughter or I'd regret it. I saw a security guard in the window, luckily. He mouthed to me, "Are you okay?" I mouthed back that I was not and shook my head. The man started to unlock the door and grabbed his phone to call the police. The moment this father saw this guy coming, he finally decided to leave, swearing angrily at us and jumping in his truck and speeding off. The girl was visibly shaken and crying. Her real parents came not too long after that incident. I left with a few words to the police about my side and gave them my number as well. I'm glad I was there because I've not seen that guy ever since. I don't know what might have happened to that young girl if I hadn't been. I learned she was only 15 years old. At one point, the man even tried to convince me that I was also his daughter. I guess he really thought that approach would work for him. My friend and I are still trying to process exactly what we just saw the other day. We've talked it through countless times, trying to figure out logically how any of this was possible. Hopefully, someone on here can give us some thoughts and ideas as to what actually happened that night. So I recently purchased a small bass boat, and my first mate Legov and I have been super eager to explore the lake and its islands. We also wanted to learn the fishing around it too. We're new to Tennessee, you see. Yesterday, on the 4th of July, we decided to go fishing in this very secluded part of the lake. We'd named this area No Man's Land because of the low-hanging bridge that prevented boaters from entering the section. My boat could just make it underneath because of how small it was, but I'd never seen another boat in there. We decided to go deeper into the cove than we'd ever been before. As we're slowly trolling down the lake, the path before us splits into 3 forks. I ask which one we should take. Legov immediately says the middle one, so we continued straight ahead as the water changed from a large lake to a narrow river-like path. This is where a chain of events happened in quick succession. We've talked it through after the fact to try and recall the order of how this all went down. The first thing that happened was we heard this weird vocal noise coming from the woods just beyond the shoreline. We both tensed up and felt immediately uneasy. "What was that?" Legov asked. "A dog, I think," I said. That was the first thing that came to mind from that sound. Legov didn't think that was a dog, though. We could see birds high above us perching on a branch and staring at us. Maybe it was a bird calling out or something. I'm not sure when it got into my hand, but at some point I drew my pistol and held it down at my side. Legov held the fishing bow. We both had a very weird feeling as we drifted down the river, eyes glued to the bank. We grew closer to a rotting pine tree that had fallen and was now half submerged in the water, sitting on the shoreline. That's when it happened. We heard a loud, very heavy-footed animal running through the woods and getting closer to the water. At first, I thought it must be a deer. But as it got closer and closer to the water, we realized it was too big to be a deer. What emerged from the tree line was a very large jet black canine. My brain immediately thought, oh, it must be a coyote. But this was much bigger, at least the size of a very huge German shepherd. It was fast too, almost like a black shadow, switching through the trees and quickly approaching the bank we were floating across from. We couldn't really make it out very well. It was very black and almost seemed kind of blurry. We couldn't quite see the fur, its face, or its eyes, just the outline of its body and tall wolf-like ears on its head. It was obviously a canine though. Adrenaline started rushing through us, and my brain raced, thinking we were about to have to defend ourselves from a large animal. It almost looked as if it were charging straight at us, but it was zigzagging and dodging through the trees toward the exact portion of the shoreline we were floating past. We were scared, but the 15 feet of water between our boat and the shoreline gave us some confidence. It would have had to swim out to reach us, and I didn't find that very likely. It continued its leaping through the woods and quickly reached our portion of the shoreline. In one majestic fluid motion, it leapt and dove into the water right under the half-submerged pine tree in front of us. That was it. We held our breath as we waited to hear it swimming or moving towards us. Small ripples reached our boat from the splash area. "Watch for it to come back up," I whispered. I had never heard of canines being able to submerge themselves underwater, but here it was happening right in front of our eyes. We waited, but nothing. Silence. Just the subtle sound of the ripples it made slowly dissipating away. We waited for 20 more seconds, but still nothing. It was almost as if the entire forest had just shut off. Silence. Our eyes were glued to that fallen pine tree. "Maybe it's hiding behind or in the water under the tree," Legov suggested. We got the courage to troll the boat a bit closer to inspect the tree, but there was nothing. No sign anything had ever been there. At this point, we were both in complete shock, stunned. It was gone. How could that be so? How could something that big just vanish, especially such a huge creature? After 30 more seconds of silence, Legov finally broke it. You just saw that, right?" A shiver flashed down my spine. "All of it," I replied. "Really though, what the fuck was that?" We both nervously laughed to each other. We stayed floating near the shoreline in shock for at least another 10 minutes, hoping for a sign we weren't going crazy. Legov scoured the waters, looking to see if that creature would come back up for air, but it never did. How could a big black wolf like that just disappear into thin air, or water for that matter? Being skeptics, there must be a logical explanation as to what we saw, but I can't really think of one. If it had just splashed into the water and gotten out again, wouldn't we have seen it walk away in whatever direction since it was so big? We also would have heard it as well, putting weight on the leaves and branches and making loud noises, but there was just silence, the loudest of silences. I suppose perhaps it drowned or something, but I really can't say. We live right in the middle of Tennessee if that helps at all. We're still both a little bit shaken up by this. This is 100% true and we're not bullshitting you. Any insight would be much appreciated.